Hi everyone, this is Ricky Spencer and welcome to another Voices Sociology of Media series for 2023. So welcome. In today's episode, we have an exciting exploration in store for you. We delve into the rich history of journalism at RMIT University, Australia. For over 50 years, RMIT has been a prominent institution in shaping the landscape of journalism, education and practice in Australia. To commemorate this significant milestone, we have the privilege of having Professor Alexandra Wake of RMIT, who is also the President of Journalism Education and Research Association of Australia, introducing a remarkable book that has just been about to be out there in a community for everyone to grab a copy and order a copy to captivate the journey through 5 decades of journalism excellence. Written by a collaborative team, this book serves as a comprehensive testament to the evolution, challenges, and triumphs experienced by generations of students, teachers, and professionals within RMIT's esteemed journalism program. Welcome, Professor Alexandra.
Thank you, Ricky, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Lovely. Let's start deep dive straight away. First question, what was the inspiration to write a book about the 50 years of journalism at RMIT?
Well, I became the program manager of the undergraduate program about 5 years ago, and it kind of occurred to me that we'd been here for a very long time, and a lot of people in Victoria and indeed around Australia and the world would say to me, "Oh, I went to RMIT." It seemed to be every function I went to, someone was saying, "Oh, I'm a graduate." And it got me thinking, I wonder how long we have been around and how long have we been doing our thing. And then the University of Queensland celebrated its centenary, I believe, of journalism education. Anyway, a very long time. So I sent my colleague, Dr. Josie Vine, who is our in-house journalism historian, into the RMIT archives, and we discovered it was 50 years. So we thought, well, we need to celebrate that because it is it's an achievement, and we're very proud of the students that we have graduated over those many years.
And there's been so many changes over the 50 years. When I remember in the 80s, when, everything was paper, or we had radio or television, and it was like, if you wanted to be a journalist of any credibility, you had to sit an exam and hope fingers that you would make it through. And that's something I think that's quite interesting. There'd be a lot of students who perhaps went through that process and have fond memories.
I don't know that there's a lot who have fond memories of the test, but even when I started 20 years ago, we actually had we would spend, I think about a week going through the applications to join the program, and heaven help the student who put the comma in the wrong place. I mean, literally, we would walk in and there would be a pile, and I'm saying, like it'd be a heaped table, and we would go through it. The whole team would sit around reading it, and in one error, one spelling mistake, into the corner they would go. We could be quite cavalier in those days, and certainly things have changed a lot since then. It's and we do have 2 different programs though. So just to be clear, we have one for the undergraduate, and now that's chosen on the ATAR score. And we did that about 10 years ago and got rid of those tests for those kids coming out of school. But for the postgraduate program, the graduate diploma, they still come in, and they do actually have to sit a verbal test. And, we ask them a few tricky questions like, who's the Prime Minister of Australia? Not so tricky. Who's the current Prime Minister of the Philippines? And we do expect them to have not just a knowledge of Australian domestic politics. They've got to know about world politics, pop culture, and the one that kills a lot of them is sport. And we're just saying, to be a good journalist, you've got to be interested in everything. And it's quite funny because, you get these, oh no, it's terrible. I know, I said, okay, describe me what the person looks like. They get there. They do really well for that.
And isn't that interesting? Because so much, at universities, we get almost get funneled into a discipline, whether it's social work or biology or physics or teach English, and we focus on that area. And when you were saying that, I thought to myself, yes, journalism, you have to be kind of a love of everything that's coming around and have a deep understanding and kind of awareness. Otherwise, it gets, we can't just be insular and just think about what's happening in the local space.
I think curiosity is probably the number one trait that a journalist needs to have, that you've actually got to be interested in the world around you. You've got to be someone who doesn't go on to the train and just look at your phone, but you're looking up and you're constantly seeing the world and wondering, why is that happening? Who's causing that rush of people? What's causing this? Why is that happening? And constantly just be curious. Even more so than the ability to write, because computers can help us with that kind of stuff these days. But actually knowing that there's a story there, understanding that there's something unusual happening here, why is it so? That to me is the defining quality.
And now let's go right into the book. How was the research for this book developed?
Well, as I said, Dr. Vine went off to the RMIT archives, a very dusty building, I understand, and she went back and literally clawed back through boxes of curriculum, and she discovered all sorts of wonderful little things. Like in the first semester, and I've just pulled up the file, it says the students studied shorthand, typing, knowledge of the library, and what Josie wrote to me as the tantalizingly vague journalism 1A and journalism 1B. So we're not entirely certain what they were learning in those very first courses. But, they did have to go on to do a research thesis as a major piece of work. Also, in the very early days, the students were linked to employers and as part of cadetship. And we, unfortunately, in those very early days, didn't have a lot of people successfully finishing the course, mostly because they were out there doing the business. So, things have changed and students are much more focused on their studies these days.
Isn't that interesting? You're saying that, and I thought, how innovative early on in those days, having that work site component, because this is something now, and we've heard in the media, in the last 10 years, we've got to have courses that are more geared towards industry and that alignment. But here we go, 50 years ago, RMIT was already in this particular course already working closely with industry.
And still today, and that is our reputation. We're very proud of the fact that we do, take industry very seriously. We look at what industry is doing. I mean, clearly, university isn't just about, we're not a TAFE college. We're not just about training someone for the job. We are training them in critical thinking and a range of other sort of high level skills. But it's always in an RMIT course. It's always with that very practical output. So even if we ask someone to do a critical reflection, we'll ask them to write it in new style. So there's always the opportunity to practice the craft alongside those other skills.
And what were you going through all the archives? Did you come across any significant turning points in the evolution of journalism at RMIT over the 50-year period?
Look, there are so many. I think there was one moment that we weren't so happy about, which was the 1979 report that showed that a third of the class failed and had to repeat. So don't know what happened in 1979. It must have been a very fun year. So there wasn't really that much, because university records aren't that exciting. So when we went back, apart from finding, this, a list of the students who graduated in the actual courses, was we went back to some of the graduates and said, can you write about your time as a journalist? And one of our own graduates, Dr. Stephanie Markitis, who did our undergraduate, then honours, and then PhD, and is now a lecturer with us, she pulled the book together. And Steffi just thought, okay, who can write best about the history? And we asked Michelle Griffith from the Age newspaper, who's a beautiful writer, to do that. And then we asked Hari Raj to write about his experiences. He's now at the Washington Post. Britt Clennett, a wonderful young woman who's now ABC America's correspondent in Hong Kong. She's just come out of reporting on the Ukraine. But even more recent graduates like Simon Love, who went through 3AW and is now the political reporter for Sky. He's talked about the relationship between political journalists and politicians. We didn't get everyone we wanted. There were a few people who had to turn us down, some because particularly some of those who are young mums were like, no, I'm not going to, on the back end of COVID, I'm not going to overload myself with another, project. There are a few areas where, I think we're going to have to do volume 2. But overall, a very good sense of the kinds of journalists we've turned out over, the 50 years.
I was just thinking as you were saying that so many questions are coming in my mind. One of them is that, and those that didn't finish the course, early on, and they still called themselves a journalist. Has it always been that one has to have a journalism degree qualification to be to acclaim themselves as a journalist?
That's a very big can of worms, and that would take us 3 hours of this kind of conversation. The bottom line is, no, you don't have to have a degree to claim to be a journalist. It's not a protected profession in that way. I'm actually part of a small group at the moment working with Professor Peter Grester and Professor Johann Lindberg. We are talking about a voluntary accreditation of journalists, which we think is something that is needed to increase trust back in journalists and journalism by signing people up to a code of ethics and conduct. So there is work going on in the academy on those issues at the moment. But back in the day, even I started out as a journalist. I started at uni and then I got a cadetship and I never finished my undergraduate. I ended up doing master's, PhD, clearly. But I didn't, in those days, when you're talking back in the 80s, you didn't actually have to have a degree to start working. So, but interestingly though, I've been to many a function where people didn't actually finish the degree, but they still say they're an RMIT journo. And I think Caroline Wilson, one of the greatest sports reporters in this town in Victoria, I don't think she finished. Well, she might have, but don't quote me. But I know she's one of the ones who's talked about the difficulty of working while just continuing to study.
And I do remember the early days, shows my age too, is that when you did your HSC, you could almost go under like a cadetship. And I remember at the Herald Sun, they had that and the Age. And I'm just a bit nostalgic here. Do they still have things like cadetships, or is that something of the past now?
No, absolutely. They still do. Usually the cadetships go to students who have a degree in journalism these days. And places like the Age and the Guardian like to have students who have a degree in something else with something like our graduate diploma of journalism, like a 1-year skills-based course. So they're the kind of student that's employed by those news outlets. News Corporation tends to like the trainees, not necessarily the ones that have a degree. Sometimes they will take them out, but there's a big push across the media for more diversity. Because going to university and getting a university degree costs money. It does rule out a whole range of people who would really like to come and study with us, which is actually, again, one of the reasons that when we were thinking about the book and why to do it, I said, well, let's do it, but let's do it as a fundraiser for an equity scholarship for someone who needs it to come to university. I mean, it's not, we can't take away HECS, which we all wish we could. But, if we can't do that, at least, let's use this, for a fund to help some students.
And I'm just thinking, as you're speaking about that, how has the curriculum or approach to teaching of journalism at RMIT evolved over the years?
Look, it's still very hands-on, and it always has been and always will be. But I think the nature of our staff has changed. So I think back in the day, it would have been seen as, I think, the expression is very white bread, very, a certain type of person from a particular, class, a particular skin color, all speaking English and particularly, Australian, mostly men. We went from all men to all women at one stage. When I started, it was an all-female teaching crew. Can I also say I don't think that's necessarily good? These days, my team is as diverse as Melbourne itself. I kind of have one of everything. So half my staff speak second English as a second language. They're all, well, let's just say they're all excellent journalists, and they're all fantastic, and they're all here on because they are excellent journalists, but very much our what we look like. You cannot be what you cannot see, and we've made a deliberate effort to attract students from from all walks of life, and the first thing we needed to do was to change what we looked like as a staff, and we've certainly done that.
In terms of diversity and inclusion, I guess I have to put that into this space. What about people who are trans and gender diverse in terms of becoming journalists? Do you feel that Australia is ready to have an openly trans journalist in terms of broadcasting on television or one of the major news outlets?
I am aware that one of my graduates, well, I am aware a couple of my graduates are trans. And I know one is quite open about being trans and works for a major news organization, but don't really want to name them because I'm not quite sure what they are on their journey. But it's increasingly common. I don't think it's the easiest road, and in the same way that the research shows anyone who presents in any way as being diverse in any form gets attacked online. Journalists get attacked online, and any kind of difference just brings terrible people out into the open. And yeah, look, it's an issue. It's not an easy career for anyone that doesn't present as in a particular way, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you that. It's something that we do talk about in class. And one of the things we talk a lot about, being supportive and being good allies. I think, though, in this conversation, I think it's always important to mention is this new generation. They are so lovely. They are lovely humans. They don't think in the ways of the 1980s. They are accepting. They are inclusive. A few years ago, we had a student in a wheelchair who had some significant and increasingly deteriorating health conditions. And can I just say, when she first started, it was like, oh my goodness, we had to change everything. Can she carry a camera? Can she do this? The staff were, like, oh goodness. And really, and all the staff got on board. Absolutely. Every staff member was fantastic. But can I just say, the students in the class, if a staff member forgot or didn't include or made, hadn't ensured there was a ramp or there were steps, or it was anyway left that student out, the other students were the first. She didn't need to say anything because the other students were there first. And I was just like going, I'm just so proud that those are the young people who are going into newsrooms, because I do think that they are this generation is a particularly nice group of people who have, who are accepting and loving and generous.
That's just so important. And I was just thinking that too, in the last 2 or 3 years, some of us who, are out there in terms of advocacy, and getting attacked online and then personally attacked. And I was just thinking, like, when you're looking at your course development, have you ever considered, or at RMIT, like perhaps doing a unit on well-being as a result for journalists coming up, how to deal with the pressure of being constantly attacked, or maybe that's not the right word, but challenged, and dealing with that sort of negativity?
Ricki, you don't even know that I've got a chapter in a book coming out called Happiness in
Oh,
journalists. And mine is on happiness and the student journalist, filling up your happiness cup.
beautiful.
There's a whole book that we've got coming out on that very
And
issue.
we're gonna have to interview you for that, because that is one of my passion areas, because I think that's something that a lot of us across all areas who are out in the community, who write, who speak from the heart, or put a positionality, and by putting yourself out there to be attacked, and I keep saying the attack because that's what it feels like when you get not so much the argument, but you attack the person behind the argument, which can be quite soul destroying.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, we're in the middle of the Voice, campaign at the moment. And as you know, I mean, I was actually reading comments underneath something this morning. I had tears running down my face. I just could not believe that people would even think to write it, let alone write what some of those comments
The
are.
other thing I was thinking as well, because as I love writing and I love journalists, is that, and one of the reasons why I do love journalists is their strong ethical position. And is that something that's really embedded from day one at your course at RMIT?
I think it is in our course. It's something we talk about a lot. And it is, how can I put this? We certainly talk about it a lot. We talk about intersectionality. We talk about all the kinds of things that come up, and we address it head on. But we are, at the end of the day, a 3-year program in the undergraduate and 1 year in the postgraduate. Once they go into newsrooms and they get socialized into a newsroom, we like to think that we've helped put a really good, strong moral compass in there. It's not always enough. I could mostly say, 99% of our graduates of both our programs have been absolutely fantastic, and I'd be, very proud, and I'm very proud of them. There would be 1% that I just go, I don't know what happened, but somewhere along the line, something went wrong. And, and I don't know if that's because they came into the program already having some, upsetting beliefs, or whether or not they grew those in newsrooms. But I do know the vast majority of our graduates think really carefully. They're not out to cause further harm. They're out to only do good. Of course, you do cause harm sometimes in journalism. We all know that, but it's not what they set out to do. It's they do think very carefully and do take the privilege of journalism very seriously.
And what are the key themes or trends that have emerged when studying the development of journalism at RMIT over the time frame?
I think one of the major changes would be actually the academic staff, and and I've already told you, I think they're all excellent journalists, and they're all deep thinking journalists. But the nature of the academy these days is that everyone must have a PhD. So that does mean that, when I first started, I would spend every waking minute, thinking about journalism and journalism stories. These days, I think maybe 50% of my time about journalism stories, and the other 50% is about that new chapter of that new book that I've got to get, that is the nature of the business that we're in, that we do also have to do that research. My research is very much focused, on the practicalities of journalism. As I've said, well-being and happiness, trauma are areas that I work in. but the others are also, everyone's got to create their own research patch. And I think that's a major change. It does mean a difference. 20 years ago, the students could walk into my office, with a slab of beer, sit down and start talking about stories. And they did regularly on a Friday afternoon. And I would welcome it and it'd be fun. And I'd be like, I'm not going to get home. These days, we're in the center of the city, we're behind, locked security doors. If they haven't made an appointment, even if, they won't get into the building. And if they haven't made an appointment, they're not going to find me here, because there are other things to be done. And I think that, it's sad in some ways, but also it reflects the times. So yeah, that's probably the biggest change, I think, that increased emphasis on that part of our work.
And do you find that journalist students want to also go globally and get experience working in different media outlets across the world, more so now than perhaps 20 years ago?
Oh, no, I think that the idea of the sort of traveling journalist has always been very strong. I mean, clearly COVID caused a bit of a problem, but no, we've got journalists in every news organization in the world, from China to the BBC, America, all through the Asia Pacific. We've got them everywhere. I don't think we've got any at Russia TV at the moment, but you would know. They're everywhere.
And now for the big question, and that's to ask you, as one of the leading professors of journalism, do you have any personal reflections or insights regarding the importance or impact of journalism education at RMIT on the industry and society as a whole?
Look, I continue to think that journalism is one of the most important things in the world. Good journalism allows us to be active citizens, to make decisions about our lives. I think that RMIT has played a leading role in creating some of the best journalists that this country has seen. People like, Nick McKenzie. I could name 100 names, but
don't forget yourself.
well, I'm not a Nick McKenzie, but I think that having a journalism lecturer who, believes in you and encourages you to do it is important for many people. Journalism is not an easy profession. It's not well paid. You're never going to be well liked. It is the most fun you can have. There's lots of things about journalism that are, they're a great deal of fun. But it's important. It's just important. And it does upset me, the attacks on journalists, which is why I'm looking at the issue of accreditation or voluntary accreditation, because we haven't always behaved well. There are parts of our profession that behave incredibly poorly. And we need to actually be able to brand ourselves as ethical and honest journalists, because society needs us to do our jobs, even with the coming of AI, even more so than ever before.
Professor Alexandra Wake, it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to speak with you and spend some time with us. And before we go, can you tell us a bit about the book launch, how people can get a copy of this really important book? And of course, is it also available digitally for those inclined?
It is. We are having it's a fundraising launch, as I've said. It's $40 to come to the fundraising launch and $45 if you want it posted, because postage costs money. And there is an Eventbrite. If you just search for 50 years of journalism at RMIT, you will find it. And we can order more. Currently not a digital book, but you aren't the first to ask that. In fact, I had a message from one of our graduates from Norway last night asking for a digital copy. So I will look into that for you. But as I say, it is a fundraiser. So if you want a copy, please order it through the Eventbrite. And you can also make a donation to the scholarship fund on that. And it's tax deductible, because that kind of assistance for students is available for that. So yes, anything you can do to support us, we would appreciate it.
That's wonderful. So I'm now reaching out to all you wonderful VCE teachers teaching media studies. Get copies, get your students to buy copies, because I think it's going to be a wonderful read and reflection. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
It's been wonderful. Thanks very much, Ricki.